Chapter 1. The Broken Vial. By the time Dante Salvator walked into the ballroom, I already knew someone was lying. Not because I had heard anything useful. Matteo's people had spent the evening speaking in low Italian around crystal flutes and candlelight. The language softened for polite company, every word varnished. But scent stripped varnish better than truth ever did. Fear had a mineral edge. Anger carried heat. Men who expected blood tried to drown it in expensive cologne and failed. The Palazzo San Gregorio smelled like roses flown in from somewhere too expensive to mention. Beeswax candles, old marble, and a room full of armed men pretending to be decorative. I stood at the far end of it in an ivory dress I had not wanted, and an engagement ring that still felt borrowed. My name was Elena Bellucci. I was 25 years old. And 3 months earlier I had agreed to marry Matteo Salvator because the Bellucci perfumery was drowning in debt, and Matteo had smiled at my mother like rescue. That should have been enough warning. He was an hour late to our engagement party. The tiny vial in my hand was the only thing that belonged to me. I had blended it that afternoon in the powder room sink because I needed something steady under all that silk. Bitter orange blossom, a thread of cedar smoke, white musk. The formula had come from one of my father's old notebooks, copied by hand in a script that wasn't his. I uncapped it and breathed once. Then the room went silent, not gradually, instantly. Like someone had shut a door on sound, I looked up. He was taller than Matteo. That was my first stupid thought. My second was that stillness could have temperature. Dante Salvator moved through the ballroom without haste and changed it anyway. Men who had been leaning went upright. A violinist stopped mid-note. His black suit was perfect, except for the drop of blood darkening one cuff. He wore leather gloves despite the warmth of the room, and when he pulled one off finger by finger, the soft drag of leather reached me across the marble. Bergamot, cold night air, gun oil. And under it blood, I realized too late that I had said the last part out loud. His head turned. Matteo had shown me photographs of his brother only once, with the careful carelessness of a man pretending not to care about the person who frightened him most. Dante, he had said, was a necessary problem, temporary, brutal, old-fashioned. He had smiled when he said it. In person, Dante was none of those things exactly. He was worse because he was controlled. He crossed the room toward me. Nobody stopped him. Nobody would have dared. I set the vial down too fast. It slipped from my fingers, struck the marble, and shattered between us. Orange blossom lifted into the air with a bright, ruined sweetness. He looked at the broken glass, then at me. "Who made that?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I did. With what formula?" I should have lied. Any sensible woman would have lied. But I had spent my life identifying things by what they really were, and lying under scent felt like trying to paint over water. "My father kept notebooks," I said. "I found one." "Notebooks," he repeated. The room had become unbearable. I could feel people watching without moving their heads. My pulse jumped. I bent automatically to pick up the largest shard before someone stepped on it. "Don't!" Too late. Glass sliced the heel of my palm. I hissed and straightened, blood brightening against my skin. Dante was in front of me before the second drop fell. He caught my wrist in his gloved hand. Black leather closed over my pulse, cool and firm. Bergamot rose from it, clean at first, then darker, warmer, threaded with the iron scent I had noticed from across the room. He looked at my blood, then inhaled once near my skin. Everything in his face changed, not softened, nothing so kind, but some locked thing inside him moved. "You smell like you're mine," he growled. The words hit the room like a knife dropped on glass. I stared at him. Somewhere behind me, somebody made a sound too small to be a gasp and too shocked to be anything else. Matteo's fiancé, his brother's hand around my wrist. The sentence hanging there, impossible and already spoken. Dante's gaze lifted to mine, dark eyes, no apology in them, only recognition so sharp it made my skin prickle. I should have stepped back. I didn't. It wasn't bravery. That would have been cleaner. It was the terrible, helpless fact that I was suddenly more curious than afraid. "You have blood on your cuff," I said quietly. His thumb stilled against the inside of my wrist. Most people, I would later understand, spent their lives trimming the truth around men like Dante until it fit safely in the mouth. I did not know how to do that, not then. That's what unsettled him, Rosa would tell me weeks later after everything. Not your face, child. That you smelled death on him and spoke to him like weather. Dante's eyes did something unreadable. Who else has that formula? He asked. No one. Where is the notebook? I thought of the strip of paper sewn into the hem of my dress. I thought of my father's desk. I thought of Matteo insisting I move into the Salvetter orbit before the wedding because it was safer there. I don't know, I lied. That at least he noticed. One corner of his mouth moved without becoming a smile. Badly done, little bride. The name landed cold, possessive only by observation, a label pinned to a living thing. Matteo asked me to marry him, I said, because I suddenly needed the words in the air, needed someone to acknowledge how insane this was. Matteo asks for many things. The musicians were motionless. The candles crackled softly in the silence. Somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, the sea kept hitting rock in the dark like nothing in the world had changed. Then Dante released my wrist. The absence of his hand felt louder than the room. He turned to the men along the wall. Find my brother. No one moved, his eyes sharpened by 1 degree. It was enough. They scattered. I looked down at the smear his glove had left just above my pulse. Bergamot, leather, something darker underneath. My own blood braided through it. Did you come here from somewhere? I asked before I could stop myself. He glanced at me. There was another wrong thing about men like him, something nobody warned women about. It wasn't only the violence. It was the way they made a question feel like trespass and invitation at the same time. Yes, that was all. I pressed my cut palm against the folds of my dress. Was someone hurt? His gaze dropped to the blood I was trying to hide, then rose again. Yes, he said, not who, not how badly, not whether the hurt had ended. The ballroom doors opened. Tommaso Bianchi came in hard, breathless, one hand near his jacket. He looked at Dante first, then at me, then very carefully at the broken vial on the floor. We didn't find Matteo, boss, he said. But his car's gone, and there was a fire at the Bellucci laboratory in Florence an hour ago. The room tilted. My mother, unhurt, Tommaso said quickly. The night staff got her out. The archives weren't so lucky. I forgot every elegant thing I had ever been taught. No, Dante did not touch me again. He did something worse. He looked as though he had expected this. I turned to him so fast my head swam. You knew. I knew the formula in that vial was a message, he said. I didn't know he would move tonight. Right to keep losing. Dante with one hand pressed hard to the wound under his ribs and his brother's blood on his mouth. He had won. He had still lost his brother by his own hand. When the last of Matteo's men either fled or dropped their weapons, when the harbor quieted enough for the sirens to matter. When Sophia burst through the west door with medics and fury and Nico sat down in a pew and announced to no one, I require bread and a new religion, Dante finally looked at me. Not the way he had in the ballroom, not the way he had on the road, like a man who had become something he feared and wanted only one witness to tell him whether he was still himself. I went to him through incense, smoke, and the ruin of old saints. He swayed once when I touched his face. It's done, I whispered, his eyes closed. At the edge of the broken altar, with rain blowing in and blood drying under bergamot, the old world ended. It was over. War leaves strange silences behind, not peace. Peace is a choice and a practice and usually a luxury. What came after St. Marta was more practical than that. Fewer calls after midnight. Fewer cars changing route twice on the same road. Men unclenching by degrees they would never admit to. The villa learning how to breathe again without expecting impact. Dante spent 12 days recovering in the East Wing, and pretending recovery was an insult. Sophia threatened him with surgical staples and public embarrassment. Rosa ignored both of them, and fed the house like grief could be outrun with bread. Nico developed a righteous fascination with wound-friendly meal plans, which would have been more convincing if he hadn't kept stealing olive cake from the kitchen, under the theory that stress exempted him from morality. You realize, Sophia told him one morning as I stood at the stove, that if you die of theatrics after surviving a gun battle, I will write the cause exactly that way. Nico touched his heart. You'd miss me? I'd miss the noise, she said. He brightened. That's almost intimacy. Even Rosa laughed. I had moved into the room at the end of Dante's corridor without anyone ever formally announcing it. That was how things happened in the villa now, not by speeches, by repetition. My books on the side table, my hairpin in his bathroom drawer. my unfinished accords slowly taking over one side of the old conservatory until even Tommaso, healed enough to stalk through doorways again, started bringing me questions about shipment contamination and warehouse mold. The Bellucci name changed too. With Caterina's letter and ledger, Dante dismantled the last of his father's hidden network instead of claiming it. The clean portion of Bellucci Aromatics survived under my mother's direction in Florence, smaller and angrier but alive. The smuggling routes died with Matteo. That cost money, influence. Men who preferred the old shadows. Dante paid anyway. One afternoon when the sky hung low and silver over the sea, I was in the conservatory building a new scent, not for sale, for myself. Bergamot first because I had stopped pretending I could leave it out. Then orange blossom, not as innocence but as memory, cedar, smoke, iris, a thread of salt. Dante came in without a sound and stood at the far end of the table watching me. "What is this one?" he asked. I didn't look up. "A bad idea. Useful, persistent." That got me the smallest exhale. I handed him a blotter. He smelled it, waited. "Well," I asked, "it starts sharp. So do most mistakes." His gaze stayed on me. "Does it end that way?" "No." I set the bottle down and finally met his eyes. "It softens where it means to." Something moved in his face, not surprise, recognition. "There," Nico said from the doorway, appearing out of nowhere with a basket of lemons and scandal on his features. "That was openly about him. I'm documenting the milestone." "Get out," Dante said. Nico wagged a lemon. "I just came to ask if the doctor likes yellow flowers or if that implies commitment, but clearly I've interrupted chemistry in both senses." "Take the lemons," I told him. He frowned down at the basket. "Do you know how hard it is to flirt while holding produce?" Sophia's voice drifted from the hall. "For you." "Impossible." He lit up and vanished after her, affronted and delighted. When the room quieted again, Dante was still holding the blotter. "I bought the Florence building next door," he said. I blinked. "Why? So Bellucci can expand if it wants." "If it wants?" "Yes," I stared at him. "That sounds suspiciously like a gift." "It's an option," he said. "I know you hate gifts that feel like collars." The tenderness of that nearly undid me, not the purchase. The fact that he had learned the shape of what I would refuse. I looked down at my stained fingers. "I hated you for a while after St. Marta." "I know. You didn't ask me not to." "No." "Why?" His answer came without armor. "Because you should have." The room went soft around the edges. He came closer. Not too close, never without giving me the space to leave first. That had become his quietest form of devotion. "I can't promise you a life untouched by this world," he said. "I can promise you I will keep cutting pieces of it away until there is as much ordinary in your days as I can make." I laughed shakily. "That is the least romantic proposal I've ever heard." He stilled. "Proposal?" I looked up, too late. A flicker of actual disarray crossed the face of the man entire port authorities once feared calling by the wrong title. It was so rare I almost wanted to preserve it in glass. He reached into his pocket, drew out not a velvet box but a ring wrapped in plain linen. "My mother S," he said. "She left it with Carlo before she ran. He gave it to Tommaso before he died in the cellar." I went very still. "It should have belonged to a future she got to choose," Dante said. "So should this." His hand, the bare one this time, opened between us. "Stay because you decided every day, not because war put you here. Stay, little bride." The nickname hit me differently now. No ownership in it. History. Warmth. Home somehow, though that should have been impossible. I did not say yes because fairy tales say yes cleanly. I put my hand in his and said, "I'm still afraid." His thumb moved once over my knuckles. "So am I." That was the answer that mattered. When he slid the ring onto my finger, it fit as if Caterina had measured me through time. I started crying before I realized it. Quietly, furiously. Dante looked stricken for half a heartbeat until I laughed against the tears. "I'm not unhappy," I managed. "I know, you don't look like you know. I'm learning." Then he bent and pressed his mouth to my forehead, nothing more. And in the kitchen down the hall, Rosa began scolding Nico for stealing olives, while Sophia tried not to laugh. It was such an ordinary sound. I think that was when I understood survival had become a life. 9 months later, the villa smelled different, still stone. Still polish and old money and armed men pretending to be furniture. But now there was also bread cooling at dawn, citrus peels drying on trays in the conservatory, Tommaso's dog asleep where no dog had ever been allowed before. And the faint floral salty trace of the new Bellucci Salvetter line, boxed for shipment in the north wing. We called the first scent Late Harbor. Nico called it obviously autobiographical, and then tried to convince Sophia that naming a perfume after shared trauma constituted collaborative intimacy. She married him anyway 3 weeks later in a courthouse ceremony, so brief, he complained for days that he had prepared better vows than the judge deserved. Also, he told me that morning while stealing candied almonds from Rose's kitchen. I would like recognition for surviving this family long enough to become legally attached to a woman who once threatened to intubate me out of spite. Sophia, passing behind him with our daughter. Yes. Ours, 4 months old, suspicious of everyone but Rosa, resting against her shoulder, said, "Not spite." Accuracy, he beamed at the baby. "See, she adores me." Our daughter sneezed in his face. Rosa crossed herself. "Gifted child." I laughed so hard I had to brace a hand on the counter. That was the radical thing. Not that danger had disappeared. It hadn't. Dante still took calls that cooled the room. Men still watched the gates. There were still nights when he came home with silence under his skin, and I could smell cold air and gun oil before I saw him. But Ordinary had arrived anyway and refused to apologize. That evening, after the baby finally slept and the house went down to murmurs, I found him in the conservatory. Rain tapped the glass in soft, irregular patterns. He stood by the marble table with shipment reports in one hand, and his other gloved palm braced against the stone, head bowed slightly, as if reading had become more effort than violence. He wore black, as always. The leather gloves had softened with age, though I still knew their scent instantly when I passed them in a room. Bergamot worked into the seams, faint and impossible to separate now from him. There was blood on his cuff, not much, someone else's probably, or his. In this house that distinction still mattered and didn't. I stopped in the doorway. He looked up. For one suspended second, we were back in the ballroom. Broken glass, orange blossom, my wrist in his hand and my whole life unfastening around me. Only now I knew exactly what I was seeing. I crossed the room slowly. "You're bleeding," I said. His mouth shifted. "Barely. Still counts." I reached him and took his wrist before he could decide whether to hide it. Same gesture. Different life. I peeled the glove off finger by finger, the soft drag of leather loud in the room. Bergamot lifted warm from his skin. Underneath it, blood, yes, and rain. And the cedar soap from our bathroom, and the paper dust of the reports he should not have been reading one-handed. He watched me the whole time. That was the bookend. The thing he had finally named months ago in the dark when the baby wouldn't sleep, and we had both stopped pretending exhaustion made us less honest. "Do you know what you do to me?" He had murmured into my hair. "No, you noticed the truth first." Now, with his bare hand in mine, I looked at the shallow cut across his palm and went to the sink for bandages. "It's from broken glass," he said. "In a meeting, someone made a poor decision. That sounds suspiciously like one of yours." A low sound left him, almost laughter. I cleaned the cut carefully. He let me. Outside, the rain thickened. Somewhere down the hall, Nico was probably making tea too loudly while Sophia told him to stop narrating the kettle. The baby stirred once over the monitor and settled again. Domesticity had never looked so dangerous to me, or so precious. When I finished, I wrapped fresh gauze around his palm and pressed a kiss to the center of it before I could think better of the impulse. His breath caught. Almost once upon a time. No longer. His free hand came to my waist. Steady, warm, entirely sure now. "Little bride," he said, no coldness left in it, no possession either, only the whole road between then and now. I leaned into him because I could, because I chose to, because innocence had not survived by remaining untouched, it had survived by staying itself while learning the cost of what it loved. He touched the side of my face with his bandaged hand, as if even now he had to relearn that he was allowed. "You did it again," he said softly. "What, you smelled blood and told me the truth before I asked for it?" I smiled a little. "You still look surprised. It still lands the same. What does it cost you?" His eyes held mine. This time he answered, "Everything I built to stay unreachable." The words settled between us with the deep quiet of earned things. I thought of Matteo, of Carlo, of Caterina's letter. Of the train I had not taken and the ordinary life that had come anyway, changed but real. Loving Dante had not made the darkness noble. It had only made honesty non-negotiable inside it. I rested my forehead briefly against his chest. If our daughter ever falls in love with a man like you, I'll lock her in the cellar. She'll break the lock. She will. Then God help him. I laughed into his shirt. He kissed my hair. In the nursery, the baby cried once, offended by some dream or hunger or the existential injustice of being 4 months old. We both turned toward the sound at the same time. There it was. The life we had built, not safer than other lives, more deliberate. I started for the door, but he caught my hand gently. "Elena," I looked back. He raised my knuckles to his mouth and kissed them like a vow he had already spent months proving. "Stay." Warm now, ordinary now, and still enough to undo me, so I did. And if there was still one unresolved thing left under all our peace, it was this: whether a life chosen in full knowledge of darkness counts as courage, or only a more honest kind of surrender. Would you have chosen Dante and let the old life burn? He, not they, Matteo. The engagement ring on my finger felt suddenly heavy enough to bruise bone. "I'm going home," I said. "No," the word was flat. I laughed once because the alternative was to break in public. "You don't get to tell me. The men who set that fire are waiting for you to run where you're expected," he said. "So no. You're not going home, you're coming with me." He held out his ungloved hand, not like a gentleman, nothing so gentle, like an order made visible. I looked at his palm. At the room full of men pretending not to watch, at the broken perfume darkening the marble, at the place where my life had been 10 minutes ago and wasn't anymore. "I'm not yours," I whispered. His gaze flicked once to the ring on my hand, then back to my face. "No," he said, "but that door is closed anyway." And when he led me out of the ballroom, nobody tried to stop us. The first thing I noticed about the villa was the sound. Not voices, not footsteps. Locks, heavy ones, old metal sliding into place somewhere inside the bones of the house. The kind that belonged to stone corridors and families who trusted doors less than guns. I heard one close as Rosa Villani led me down the east wing just before dawn, and the noise settled between my shoulders like a hand. "Don't look like that," Rosa said, pushing open a bedroom door with her hip. "If he wanted you trapped, child, you wouldn't hear the lock." She was in her 60s, silver hair pinned hard at the back of her head. Flour still dusting one sleeve of her black cardigan, as though she had been dragged from bread to crisis without warning. She smelled like yeast, basil, lavender soap, and practical mercy. "I'd like to go to Florence," I said. "So would half this house." "Nobody's leaving before daylight." She set a tray on the table by the windows. Tea, toast, a tiny bowl of apricot jam, normal things, cruel things under the circumstances. The room was beautiful in a way that irritated me. Pale walls, high ceiling, see beyond the terraced doors, expensive silence. My suitcase had materialized before I had even realized I'd left it in the palazzo. My cut palm had been bandaged by a doctor in the car. My dress was gone. In its place, folded on the bed, was a linen nightgown and a dark robe that smelled faintly of cedar from storage. "Your mother called an hour ago," Rosa said. "She's with cousins in Florence." Shaken. Alive, that should have been relief. It was a little. It was also terror made patient. "And Matteo," Rosa's mouth flattened. "If you want useful answers, ask someone useful." I had been in the villa less than 20 minutes when the man in question appeared in the doorway without knocking. Dante looked as though he had changed clothes and not slept. Black shirt, no tie, hair still damp from a shower that had failed to wash the night off him. His gloves were back on. I hated that I noticed that first. Rosa looked between us, muttered something under her breath about saints and fools, and left with the empty teapot before either of us spoke. He shut the door behind her. The room got smaller. "I need to go to my mother," I said. "You will. When I know where Matteo is and who burned your laboratory." "My laboratory? Your family's." The correction hit harder because it was accurate. Bellucci Aromatics had been my father's and my grandfather's and every Bellucci's before that. Since my father died, it had also been debt notices, unpaid suppliers, and me sleeping at my work table because if I left long enough, I thought maybe the whole thing would dissolve. "You said it was a message," I said. "What message?" He looked at the bandage on my hand. "The formula in your vial. It was perfume. It was my mother." For a second, I forgot everything else. I had met Caterina Salvetter only once. in a newspaper photograph yellowed at the edge in a gossip archive. Beautiful in the cold way dead women always looked when the world simplified them after the fact. Missing for 14 years, presumed dead, society beauty, wife of Don Salvator, there had been rumors, there were always rumors. That formula was in my father's notes, I said carefully. It wasn't your father's. Something in his voice made my spine go rigid. Then whose was it? He didn't answer. I wanted to throw something at him. The tray, the jam, the whole damn room. You keep doing that. What? Talking as if the truth belongs to you. A pulse moved once in his jaw. There it was again. That infinitesimal crack in composure, the one I saw only because I was looking too hard. Or maybe because he did not know yet how closely I listened with my nose, my skin, all the senses I had spent years training into something useful. My brother intended to marry you for a reason, he said. Until I know all of it, you stay here. You don't get to make rules for me. I already have, he said it without heat, almost gently. Which was worse? I was still deciding whether to tell him exactly what I thought of his rules when the door flew open, and a man carrying 3 phones, 2 folders, and a face full of exhaustion nearly walked into the room sideways. Boss, if we could avoid any murders until noon, I would appreciate it, he said to Dante without looking up. Stress ruins ketosis, and Sophia says my cortisol is a civic problem. He saw me, stopped, and blinked. Ah, the fiancé. Formerly, maybe, I muttered. His expression brightened with inappropriate interest. Excellent, chaos before breakfast. My favorite. This is Nico Ferraro, Dante said, with the kind of patience men reserve for necessary disasters. I run surveillance, logistics, and everyone else's bad decisions, Nico said. He was maybe 30, beautifully dressed, and dramatic in the manner of a man who had survived enough violence to find complaining about it spiritually important. Also, for the record, I told Matteo that burning a perfumery was a tacky opening move. Dante's gaze shifted to him. Nico lifted one hand. Allegedly. Despite myself, I almost smiled. Nico noticed. There she is, a pulse. Good. Dr. Conti said if anyone in this house made the bride cry before dawn, she'd sedate all of us and let God sort the schedule. As if summoned by her name, Doctor. Sophia Conti appeared behind him in navy scrubs and righteous irritation. I said I'd sedate you, she corrected. The rest are structurally unsalvageable. Nico put a hand to his chest. This is why I adore her. She sees me. Sophia brushed past him, came to me, and checked my bandage with quick, cool fingers. She smelled like antiseptic mint and 6 hours without sleep. Any dizziness? No. Good, change the dressing tonight. She glanced at Dante only once. And if you're keeping her here, try not to make it feel like kidnapping. I'm not trying, he said. Sophia sighed as though this confirmed something she had long feared. Then she lowered her voice to me. If you need anything practical, ask Rosa. If you need anything honest, ask me. If you need a door opened, don't ask Nico. He'll monologue. I monologue beautifully, Nico said. Dante moved toward the door. Conversation ended around him the way rooms seemed to. There will be a guard outside, he said. My temper flashed. I'm not a prisoner. No, he said, looking at me at last. You're bait. The word chilled the whole room. He opened the door, paused. Without turning back, he added, Don't open anything with my brother's name on it. Then he left. I stared at the doorway long after it closed. Nico exhaled. Well. That was tender by his standards. Sophia slapped his arm. He winced. See, violence everywhere, and people ask why I fast. Outside, metal slid into place. I went very still. The lock was staying. By afternoon, I had learned 3 things about the Salvator villa. First, every hallway had at least one camera tucked into stonework or shadowed molding. Second, nobody said Matteo's name unless forced. Third, Dante Salvator believed information was a ration and I was on starvation allotment. That lasted until he brought me into the blue room. It wasn't actually blue, not in any cheerful way. The walls were lined in faded silk, the color of smoke just before rain. The long table in the middle held shipping manifests, photographs, a dismantled pistol, and 6 uncapped sample vials laid out with military precision. I stopped at the threshold. Why am I here? Dante stood at the far end of the table with Tommaso Bianchi and Carlo Ventresca. Tommaso gave me a look that was almost apologetic. Carlo, white-haired and soft-spoken, nodded like a man welcoming me to dinner instead of evidence. Because, Dante said, someone moved a container through my docks under Bellucci labels this morning. I crossed the room before he finished speaking. The vials held jasmine absolutes from different suppliers, or at least they were supposed to. I picked one up, uncapped it, and inhaled. Solvent bite, synthetic sweetness. Cheap adulteration hiding under floral brightness. This isn't grass jasmine, I said. It's cut with benzyl acetate and something dirtier. Where did it come from? Tommaso looked faintly impressed. Carlo looked careful. Container Fort Welve, Tommaso said, cleared customs before dawn. It shouldn't have. I moved to the next vial, then the next. These three are from the same fake batch. Whoever handled them didn't know real jasmine leaves a green shadow at the back of the throat. This, I held one out toward Dante. This was built for people who only want the label. His gaze stayed on my face, not the vial. Can you separate the shipment by scent alone? Yes. How long? I considered. If the warehouse isn't ventilated badly, 2 hours. Nico, lounging by the door with a tablet and the expression of a man who enjoyed other people's competence almost as much as he enjoyed gossip, made a thoughtful sound. She's terrifying in a very refined way. I heard that, I said. Good, I meant it. Dante stepped aside from the table. Then you'll do it. I looked up sharply. You're taking me to the docks. I'm taking you where you're useful. That should have irritated me. It did. It also woke something in me that grief and debt had been crushing for months. Bellucci aromatics had been reduced lately to invoices, repairs I could not afford, and suppliers waiting to see if I would fail. Nobody had looked at my skill and seen a weapon in it for a long time. Carlo smiled kindly. I'll have a car brought round. At the docks, the air changed. Salt, diesel, wet rope, sun-warmed concrete. Men with holsters under suit jackets pretending to be shipping managers. The sea lay flat and metallic beyond the cranes. I followed the scent trail into Warehouse C with Dante beside me and Tommaso 3 steps back. Nobody tried to speak to me. Nobody got in my way. That was almost more unnerving than the guns. I worked row by row, opening crates, breaking seals, smelling my way through fraud. Dante said very little. When he did, men moved. A container was marked, then another. By the 12th, I had stopped noticing how close he stood until I turned too quickly and brushed his chest with my shoulder. The contact lasted less than a second, long enough. Heat climbed my throat. I stepped back immediately, furious with myself for feeling anything except alarm. He had not touched me. He did not apologize. His hand lifted a fraction at my elbow anyway, not quite catching me, then dropped again before the gesture could become anything. Almost. It left the air charged. By the end of the second hour, we had isolated 46 crates and one entire manifest altered in the same hand. Matteo never cared about perfume, I said quietly, staring at the forged signatures. He used my family labels because nobody checks beauty goods as hard. Tommaso cursed under his breath. Nico, on a call near the loading bay, muttered, If this turns into narcotics, I'd like to formally request a less cliché work environment. Dante took the paper from me. Your father ever mentioned Salvatore shipping routes? No. His notebooks, I hesitated. There it was again, the edge of the truth I had not given him. My father hid things inside formulas, I said at last. Supplier names, dates, sometimes debts. He said perfume was safer than paper because only the patient learned how to read it. Dante's face gave nothing away, but Tommaso looked at Carlo. Carlo looked down, a small revelation. Not yet a full one, enough to make the day rearrange itself. On the far side of the warehouse, a forklift beeped in reverse. A gull screamed overhead. The world stayed ordinary for exactly 1 more second. Then glass exploded above us. Someone shouted. Dante's hand hit the back of my neck and drove me down behind a stack of pallets as a bullet punched through the crate where my head had been. Splinters rained over my hair. Men drew weapons with a sound like fabric tearing. The warehouse became echo and orders and gunfire contained inside discipline. I was on my knees, breath gone, heart slamming against my ribs. Dante crouched in front of me, one knee down, body between mine and the open floor. He had his gun out. Of course he did. The barrel stayed steady while chaos burst around us. Stay down. Another shot cracked. I grabbed his sleeve before I thought better of it. Tommaso, handled. His eyes flicked once to my hand on him, then back to the line of fire. He moved only when he had to. That was the frightening part. No wasted motion. No shouted rage, just decision after decision exact enough to terrify, 3 shots from his side. 2 from somewhere behind me, then silence came back in ragged pieces. Tommaso appeared near the shattered office window, swearing. Shooter's dead, boat on the east side got away. Boat. Not random then, planned. Dante stood and offered me his hand. I took it because the floor was slick with spilled oil and trembling is harder to do upright. The scent hit me then, bergamot from his glove, salt, gun smoke, and the cold, clean snap of adrenaline over skin. I looked at him and understood with ugly clarity that his world was not full of danger. His world was danger arranged. That night, after Rosa made me eat soup I could not taste, he sent the forged manifest and 1 page from my father's old archive to my room. On the page, in a woman's slanted hand, not my father's, 3 words sat beneath a formula for orange blossom and ash, for the eldest bride, and I did not know yet that Dante had already read the rest. Dante, she stood in gunfire and reached for me instead of herself. Then, in the car back, she read my mother's handwriting and still did not ask the safest question, not who was Caterina Salvator. Not what did this make her. She asked why Matteo burned Florence first. Nobody in my world led with mercy. Nobody smelled blood and told the truth. I should have sent her away before I learned what that would cost. Rain started after midnight and turned the villa into an echo chamber. I woke to thunder and the smell of wet stone. For a few disoriented seconds I forgot where I was. Then the lock beyond my door clicked, footsteps crossed the hall, and memory returned in full dress. I had been staring at the page marked for the eldest bride for an hour when the power cut out. The darkness was immediate and complete. I stood too fast, hit my knee on the bed frame, and swore softly. Somewhere down the corridor someone shouted in Italian. Then came Rosa's voice, unimpressed by apocalypse. Candles are in the drawer, unless the men have weaponized incompetence again. I found one with shaking hands, lit it, and opened my bedroom door onto a hallway full of shadow. The emergency lamps had not kicked in. Rain battered the windows. The house felt ancient enough to swallow light whole, a figure detached from the dark at the far end. I knew him by scent before the candle found his face. Bergamot, wet leather, the cold of outside still clinging to him. You shouldn't be out here, Dante said. I shouldn't be in here either. Another crack of thunder shook the glass. His gaze moved once over my nightgown, the robe tied too fast over it, the candle wax running down my fingers. He looked away so quickly it almost counted as kindness. There's a backup generator below the chapel, he said. Stay in your room. Is everyone all right? Yes. That meant no or not fully. I was learning his language. Before I could answer, a second sound rolled through the house, metal on stone, then a muffled pop too contained to be thunder. Dante's entire body changed. Downstairs. Now he crossed the distance between us in 3 strides, took the candle from my hand and caught my elbow with his other hand. Not rough, unarguable. He moved me through a side passage and down a narrow stair I would never have found alone. The cellar under the chapel smelled like damp limestone, dust, candle wax, and old wine. He shut us inside a vault room lined with shelves and the bones of previous centuries. Above us, feet pounded. A gunshot cracked once, then once more. I swallowed hard. You said everyone was all right. They were. You lie by tenths. Something in his face almost gave. He set the candle on a shelf. In its light, I saw Rain darkening his shirt at the shoulders and a thin white scar just below his collar where the fabric had shifted. Not old enough to have faded. Not new enough to explain tonight. Was that the generator? I asked. No. Then what? He looked toward the ceiling, waited, the silence above sharpened, listening back. A charge at the east gate, he said. Small. Meant to draw men away. And us? Me. Honesty, when it came from him, landed like impact. I wrapped my arms around myself to stop them shaking. Do they always do this? No. The answer was so dry I stared at him until I realized he was making a joke. A joke so thin it barely qualified as human. It nearly undid me. A laugh escaped me anyway. Short, disbelieving, wrong for the moment. His eyes came back to my face and held there, almost. The room got too quiet. I looked away first and saw, on the far shelf behind him, a row of old perfume flacons stored among sacramental wine bottles. My pulse tripped. That glasswork, I said softly. It's Bellucci, he followed my gaze. My mother kept things down here, he said. Before what? Before she disappeared, before she died. Before men turned grief into architecture and locked it underground, I stepped closer to the shelf. One flagon still held a trace of scent. Time had thinned it but not erased it. Orange blossom, ash. A bitter little gold note of burnt sugar underneath. The same formula. I turned. She knew my father. Yes, the word went through me. Dante reached past me for the flagon and stopped when the back of my hand brushed his wrist. Just that. Skin to leather, nothing and too much. My breath caught. So did his. He withdrew first. Restraint looked painful on him. I hated noticing. What was she to him? I asked. A friend. His jaw hardened. One of the few she trusted. And Mateo knows this? Not all of it. Then tell me. Thunder moved farther out to sea. Above us, the house settled by degrees. The danger wasn't gone. It had only stepped back. Dante looked at the flagon in his gloved hand. When he spoke, the words were chosen like sutures. My mother tried to leave this family, he said. The night she ran, she gave your father a ledger hidden inside perfume formulas. Names, routes, payments. Enough to destroy my father if it ever surfaced. She wore this scent so I'd know if I ever found the ledger that it came from her. There it was, the answer to the first mystery. Why Mateo had come for Bellucci archives. Why Florence burned. Why Dante had looked at broken perfume like a body on the floor. And the eldest bride? I asked. A shadow crossed his face so quickly I felt it more than saw it. She wrote that for the woman she thought I might marry one day. My throat closed around something too strange to name. I should have stepped back then. Should have remembered the ring in my jewelry case upstairs, and the brother at the center of this ruin. Instead I said, she was planning for a future she didn't get. He looked at me as if I had opened a door I shouldn't even know existed. A pounding started at the cellar door. I flinched. It's me, Nico called through the stone. Please don't shoot the hinges. Sophia says I'm not allowed to die before I admit she's right about sodium. Dante opened the door. Nico stood there drenched, hair plastered to his forehead, clutching a flashlight and what appeared to be a protein bar. Sophia was behind him with a med kit, visibly one sigh away from homicide. Good, Nico said, seeing us alive. I was preparing a prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for not letting the boss kill anyone in the chapel cellar tonight. Well, anyone important. Also, if Dr. Conti keeps threatening my electrolyte balance, I may sue this family. Sophia handed me dry gauze. Ignore him. He metabolizes drama. Nico noticed the old flagon in Dante's hand and very deliberately noticed nothing else. By morning, the east gate would be repaired. Men would scrub blood from stone. The world would keep moving because violent worlds always did. But as Dante walked me back upstairs, candlelight catching the rain on his shoulders, I knew two things with terrible certainty. His mother had reached for my father in the dark, and something between us had already crossed a line neither of us had touched cleanly. The secret came open because Rosa wanted to mend my dress. There are humiliations you can prepare for. Public pity, debt collectors, being abandoned at your own engagement party. There are others that arrive carrying a sewing basket and good intentions. It's expensive silk, Rosa said, spreading the ruined ivory dress across the work table in the little sitting room outside my bedroom. Blood comes out, pride doesn't. Sit down. I should have stopped her when she ran her fingers along the hem. I did not, because part of me still believed if I stayed quiet long enough the world might leave one thing buried. Then Rosa's thumbnail caught the stitched inner seam, and the folded packet slid into her lap. We both stared at it. The paper was thin with age, wrapped in waxed cloth, tied with thread that had once been cream. My father had sewn it there 2 weeks before he died. He had pressed the dress bag into my hands and told me if anyone ever came asking about Caterina Salvetter, I was to become stupid. I had tried. Rosa did not unfold it. That made me love her a little. Should I call him, she asked, or would you prefer to throw yourself out the window first? I took the packet, sat very still, and felt the last private piece of my life tipping toward daylight. Call him? Dante arrived alone. He shut the door, looked at Rosa, and she left after pinning me with a look that translated roughly to do not mistake silence for safety. I placed the packet on the table between us. I wasn't hiding it from Mateo, I said before he could speak. I was hiding it from everyone. His gaze stayed on the cloth. Why? Because my father was afraid. That's not an answer. It's the only one I had at 19. Something in his expression shifted, not gentler, less hard maybe. I untied the thread with fingers that wanted to tremble and refused them the satisfaction. Inside were 6 pages of formulas, 1 miniature ledger, and a single note in Caterina Salvator's hand. If Elena Bellucci ever carries this, it means I failed. Dante stopped breathing for half a second. I saw it. I heard it. I hated that I was now the kind of woman who noticed the exact shape of a dangerous man's silence. She knew my name, I whispered. No, he said, voice rougher than usual. She knew your grandmother's. Elena was the first daughter's name in your line. He came around the table and stood beside me, close enough that I could smell him without trying. Today it was bergamot again, black wool, and the colder scent of rain not yet fallen. We read in silence. My father had annotated Caterina's formulas in the margins, translating flowers into dates, base notes into dock numbers, rare resins into accounts. It was exactly the kind of code he would admire, and exactly the kind of thing that could get people buried under churches. Container schedules, I murmured. Payments routed through cosmetics imports. These aren't just perfume notes. No, Matteo wanted access to Bellucci labels because the old channels still exist. Yes, the truth clicked into place with the clean finality of a lock. My engagement, Florence, the fake Jasmine at the docks. Matteo had not chosen me. He had chosen a key wearing a woman's face. I laughed once. It sounded sick. Dante's hand moved toward mine on the table and stopped just short. Almost, he pulled it back. I should have told you sooner, he said. Would I have believed you? No, that doesn't help. No, but the space between us changed anyway, not because he explained himself, because he didn't. Because for once the silence did not feel like control. It felt like damage. I touched the last page. Beneath a formula for iris and burnt sugar, my father had written one line in the margin, "Trust the man who still smells the smoke." What does that mean? I asked. Dante's eyes went distant for a second. When my mother disappeared, the east wing burned. My father said it was an accident. His jaw tightened. I walked into the room after. I smelled kerosene on the curtains for days. A chill moved through me. So she was taken. Yes, and Matteo knows the ledger proves it. Yes, I should have felt only fear. Instead, I felt the far more dangerous thing underneath it. A sudden, painful understanding of the man standing beside me. Not his power, the shape of the wound under it. I folded the note carefully. Then he won't stop. No, neither will I. His gaze cut to mine. Something dark and startled crossed it, as if I had said the one thing he had not expected from me. A knock sounded once. Tommaso entered without waiting, which told me the news was bad before he spoke. The chapel courier never arrived, he said. And someone tried the East Service gate with Carlo's key code. Carlo, who had served this house for 23 years. Dante went still in a way I had learned to fear. Where is he? He asked. Tommaso's expression hardened. Gone. The betrayal was not confirmed, not yet, but it was in the room now, breathing. Dante took the packet from the table and handed it back to me. Keep it with you, he said. I stared. You trust me with it? No, he said quietly. I trust what you do when you're afraid. That landed harder than trust would have. When he left the room, the note still warm from his hand, I realized the worst part was no longer Matteo's lie. It was that I no longer knew which Salvator brother frightened me more. By evening, the house had the strained quiet of a cathedral waiting for a scream. Men moved faster, doors closed softer. Even Rosa chopped parsley like she was considering murder. No one said Carlo's name unless necessary, and when they did, it sounded like something being tested for cracks. I was in the old conservatory with a tray of salvaged essences Rosa had bullied out of storage when Dante found me. The conservatory overlooked the western garden and the sea beyond it. Lemon trees in painted pots, cracked terracotta, rain drying on glass. I had claimed the long marble table because it reminded me of work, and because if I kept my hands occupied, I didn't have to think about how easy it had become to track him by scent alone. I thought you were resting, he said. I thought you were impossible. We're both disappointed. The corner of his mouth almost moved. On the table in front of me sat 6 small beakers, blotter strips, a burner, and an atomizer bottle. Orange blossom, bergamot, iris, cedar, smoke accord, and a trace of labdanum. Not many materials, but enough to build something true if I was careful. He looked at the setup. What is that? Proof I don't spiral well in silence. I dipped a strip, let it dry, then passed it toward him. Smell! He took it without removing his gloves. Bergamot lifted first, bright and cold, then softened into orange blossom before something darker came up underneath like a second pulse. His gaze flicked to mine. It's not finished, I said. What is it? I hesitated. Telling the truth had become a bad habit around him. A person who looks harder than she feels, I said. Citrus on top, smoke in the heart. Something fragile buried low enough that most people miss it. He said nothing. My skin warmed anyway. It was too much, too exposed. I reached for the strip back, but he moved first and folded his fingers around it. Almost. He didn't touch my hand. I felt the missed contact anyway. That's what she was doing, he said after a moment. I blinked. Who? My mother. He set the strip down with absurd care. Building messages out of scent so only the right person would hear them. Before I could answer, Nico stumbled into the conservatory carrying 3 folders, a bag of almonds, and a look of theatrical suffering. I've had 6 espressos, no bread, and 1 emotionally devastating voicemail from Sophia informing me that self-starvation is not a personality, he announced. Then he noticed the table. Oh, wonderful perfume and repressed eye contact. I live here now. Go away, Nico, Dante said. Can't. Crisis. Nico tossed a folder onto the marble. A truck left the lower road 15 minutes ago under Bellucci branding. Driver dead, manifest fake, route heading north. Also, if either of you has anything remotely sugary, I am prepared to compromise with God. I was already flipping the folder open. One of the pages had a fuel receipt attached. Diesel, wet paper, engine grease, and something else. I bent closer. Wait, Dante watched me. What? I brought the receipt to my nose. This wasn't in the truck. It was in a pocket that brushed fabric carrying orange leaf absolute and starch. Nico blinked. You can smell starch in a conspiracy? Yes. Marry me instead. I'll learn to deserve it. Dante's eyes lifted to him so flatly that Nico backed up a step and held up both hands. Professionally, I meant professionally. I looked at the paper again. Uniform starch, not dockworkers, house staff. The room tightened. Carlo, Tommaso came in at speed as if summoned by the name none of us had said. Boss, we traced the truck to the coastal road. Could be decoy. It is, Dante said. But we go anyway. His gaze dropped to me. You stay here. No, this isn't a discussion. I set the receipt down. The paper carries orange leaf because it rubbed against the ledger packet. Carlo got close enough to touch it or the place it was hidden. If he's leading Matteo to the wrong site, fine. If he isn't, then whoever meets that truck will be expecting perfume people, not armed men. I'll know if they're moving real Bellucci stock or just labels. His expression changed by degrees. Your bait, he had said in my room. Useful, he had said at the docks. Now he looked at me like the most dangerous thing was that I was right. No, he said again, quieter. I took a breath I shouldn't have needed. I'm tired of being moved like furniture. You think this is about control? I think everything with you is about control. The words landed, hard. Nico made a tiny sound and decided for once not to be funny. Dante crossed the space between us, fast enough to rattle me, not enough to touch. He stopped 1 breath away. If I lose focus for 1 second because you're in range, he said, each word precise, men die. The silence after that had weight. I looked at his throat because looking at his eyes felt impossible. That's not the reason, I said softly. His hand lifted, hovered near my face, stopped, restraint again. It crackled between us like a live wire held under glass. No, he said. It is. Then he turned away and gave the order anyway. We left within 10 minutes. The ambush came on the lower coastal road where the cliff narrowed and the guardrail had rusted down to ceremony. Headlights cut through sea fog. Tires hissed on wet pavement. I was in the second car with Tommaso when the first explosion hit the lead vehicle and turned night white. Everything happened at once after that. Gunfire, glass, the driver shouting, Tommaso throwing himself across me as rounds punched the windshield. I tasted metal and powder and fear so sharp it made my vision thin. Elena, down! I did, but the car skidded sideways hard enough to slam my shoulder into the door. My ears rang. Outside, men were already moving through smoke. Then Dante was there. I didn't see how he reached my side. 1 second I was trapped in fractured glass and seat belt webbing. The next his hand was cutting the belt free. His body blocking the open door. his voice low and lethal in a language made for orders. He dragged me out and shoved me behind the engine block of the wrecked lead car just as another burst tore through the air where I had been. After that, I only remember it in flashes. His glove at the back of my neck, Tommaso bleeding from the arm and still firing. The man who got too close, and the way Dante put him down with one efficient movement that looked less like rage than arithmetic. Blood on his cuff again, bergamot rising through smoke. He killed 3 men getting me off that road. When the last shot finally died against the cliff face, my hands were shaking so badly I could not hide it anymore. Dante crouched in front of me, chest heaving once, twice. His cheek was split. There was someone else's blood across his collar. "You hurt," I tried to answer and failed. Then, because honesty around him had become a disease, I said the thing that cost me. "I thought you were dead." His gaze changed, not softer, never that simple, but the iron in it bent. He put one gloved hand against the side of my face, barely there. The leather was cool, the touch was not. "Little bride," he said, and for the first time it was not a possession. It was almost a plea. Then his thumb moved once under my eye, catching tears I had not felt fall, and he leaned in, stopped, one breath from my mouth. Another second and the world would have changed. He pulled back. War had arrived anyway. Dante, it was not her face, not her mouth, not the fact that every instinct in me turned toward her until the rest of the road blurred. It was that first night in the ballroom when she smelled blood under bergamot, looked straight at me, and did not move back. No one had done that since my mother. No one had told me the truth in the same breath they feared me. That was the fracture. That was where I started losing. Tommaso took the bullet clean through the upper arm and called the surgeon dramatic for insisting on stitches. That was how I knew I had begun to care about him. The villa turned into an infirmary by dawn. Sophia swore through 3 languages while patching men up in the West Salon. Rosa made broth no one had time to drink. Nico lurked with tablets, gauze, and a martyr's expression that suggested he expected a medal for not fainting at the sight of blood. "I'm fine," Tommaso told me from the sofa where he sat stripped to the waist, white bandage fresh against his shoulder. "If the boss says I limp, I resign on principle." "You'd bleed to death on principle," Sophia muttered, knotting the dressing tighter. He hissed. "Doctor, if your bedside manner gets any kinder, people will talk." I handed him water. His fingers brushed mine, warm, steady. It made what happened next worse. Dante came in from the courtyard carrying rain on his coat and a silence that changed the room. He looked at Tommaso's bandage, then at me, then at the phone in his hand. "Your mother is on her way to Rome," he said. "There's a train at 1:30, 2 guards will take you." The water glass chilled in my palm. "You're sending me away. I'm giving you a choice." A real one, that was the problem. Tommaso looked from one of us to the other and found urgent business in not existing. Sophia did the same. Even Nico, saint of badly timed commentary, kept his mouth shut. "I thought I was useful," I said. "You are." "Then why now?" His eyes held mine. "Because last night 3 men died trying to reach you. Today there will be more." The room smelled like antiseptic broth and the storm still waiting offshore. My pulse felt too loud. "You said there was a choice," I said. "What's the other one?" "You stay," he said, "and this becomes your war too." It already had, we both knew it. But hearing him say it made the floor tilt under me. I left the salon before anybody could watch me break. In my room I packed badly, shirts, 2 dresses, my father's packet. A bottle of unfinished accord from the conservatory. My passport, the engagement ring which I had taken off after the coastal road and never put back on. I stared at it on the dressing table a long time before closing the drawer on it. Rosa found me with a garment bag and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "So," she said, "are you leaving because you should or because he asked you to?" "I don't know." "Then wait until you do." "I can't breathe in this house." "Of course you can't." "It's full of men." I laughed once helplessly. Rosa set the garment bag down. "There is no clean version of this, Elena. If you go, go because you still belong to the life before. If you stay, don't you dare pretend you were dragged." Her words followed me all the way to the train platform. Rome smelled like hot iron, coffee, wet newspapers, and people pretending not to stare at the 2 armed men pretending not to be armed beside me. My mother stood under the departure board in a navy coat, clutching my face the second she saw me. "Tesoro, look at you, look at what they've done to you." I held her hard enough to hurt. For 1 full minute I let myself imagine it. Boarding, Florence later, maybe not at all. Paris, where one of my father's suppliers had once offered me a position, a smaller life, a safer one, no Salvetter brothers, no bergamot on leather. No waking every morning feeling like I had stepped halfway out of my old skin and couldn't get back in. Then my mother drew back and searched my face with the terrible accuracy mothers keep hidden until necessary. "You're not coming," she said. The train hadn't even arrived. "I should, but you are." I looked down at the ticket, white cardstock, ordinary, the whole world reduced to one thin permission slip. "If I leave," I said slowly, "Matteo will keep using Bellucci roots. He'll burn what's left of my father's name into whatever this becomes. He'll use the ledger to bury Dante or bargain with him. And people I know will die while I tell myself I chose wisely." My mother went very still. "You care for him," she said. I thought of Dante on the road with blood on his collar and my life in both hands. I thought of how carefully he kept not touching me. I thought of how he had offered me the exit instead of closing it. "I don't know what I feel," I whispered. "I only know what I can't unsee." That was the cost, not romance, not some reckless fantasy. Knowledge. I had seen what his world cost, and also what he kept paying to keep one piece of it from touching me. There was no going back to innocence that had never looked at blood and stayed. My mother touched my cheek. "Then choose with your eyes open." The train arrived with a rush of wind and steel. I put the ticket into her hand. "Go to Aunt Lucia," I said. "Take the archive insurance money, rebuild something clean if you can. And you?" I looked past her at the tracks, at the life I could still board if I lied to myself hard enough. Then I turned away. It cost me Bellucci aromatics as I had imagined it. The future where I saved it alone. The part of myself that still believed love and danger lived in separate houses. By the time I walked back into the villa that evening, rain was starting again. The guard at the gate looked surprised to see me. Rosa did not. She only took my wet coat and said, "Good." I made too much supper. Tommaso, pale but upright, gave me a tired nod from the hall. "Bad day to be sensible, huh? Apparently." Then I saw Dante at the far end of the corridor. He had been speaking to Nico. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. For one long second, neither of us moved. "You chose this," his face said. "Yes," mine answered before I could stop it. He came toward me slowly, as if I might still vanish. "You missed your train," he said. "I know." His gaze flicked to my empty hands, my wet hair, the packet tucked under my arm. "You came back." No one else in the hall mattered, not the armed men, not the marble under my shoes. Not Nico, who quietly turned and walked in the opposite direction with the exquisite discretion of a man who had finally learned fear. I swallowed. "Don't make me explain it while I'm still stupid enough to do it." Something broke open in his eyes, not relief, worse, need checked by will. His hand lifted to brush rain from my temple and stopped just before contact. "Almost." "Little bride," he said, low enough that only I heard it. "You should have gone." "I know." But I had walked back in myself. I made my mistake the next morning. That mattered. It had to. Women in stories are too often forgiven because the plot loves them. The truth was simpler and meaner. I was frightened, tired, and newly arrogant in the belief that because I had chosen the darkness, I could navigate it. Nico found me in the breakfast room with a fax, an espresso, and the air of a man personally betrayed by carbohydrates. "Sophia says if I keep replacing meals with caffeine, my organs will unionize," he informed me. "Also, this arrived from Florence for you." The fax bore the Bellucci letterhead, smudged but genuine. "Supplier arbitration. Insurance release. A warehouse transfer form requiring my signature in person before noon or remaining materials would be seized. It made perfect practical sense. That should have warned me. Instead, I felt the old panic of collapsing accounts and staff waiting for answers. Bellucci was not only memory, it was workers, formulas, years. I called the number on the page. A man answered with the clipped impatience of a Florentine accountant. He knew my father's middle name. He knew which stills had survived the fire. By the time I realized how much I wanted the paper to be real, I had already crossed the line. "I can go to the city office and sign," I told Nico. "In and out." No drama. Nico, who was balancing 3 surveillance feeds and a grapefruit he claimed was medicinal, looked up too late. "Did Dante approve that sentence?" "I'm not asking for approval." Ah, he said, then this is going to be educational. Tommaso was asleep under Sophia's threat of chemical enforcement. Dante was at the lower docks. The guard detail assigned to me changed at 11. I told myself I was not sneaking out. I was acting, solving, being useful. At the city office, the receptionist smiled too quickly. I smelled bleach, paper dust, copier toner, and something sweet under it. Almond, pharmaceutical, sedative clinging to wool. I turned. Too late, the cloth hit my mouth from behind. I bit hard, twisted, drove my elbow into someone's ribs, and got one sharp breath before the sweetness flooded my head. The room broke into bright pieces. When I woke, there were no windows, concrete walls, a single bulb, metal chair, salt in the air, distant and damp. Somewhere close, a generator coughed every 15 seconds. I cataloged all of it because cataloging was better than panic, and because scent, unlike hope, gave dependable answers. Tar, sea rot, old incense. Citrus cleanser used badly to cover blood. A church warehouse, near water. The door opened. Carlo Ventresca came in carrying a bottle of water and all the age in his face at once. For a second I thought I was still drugged. "Carlo, drink," he said. I didn't take it. "You sold me." He looked away first. That hurt more than outrage should have. Carlo, who had smiled when I identified fake Jasmine. Carlo, who had asked whether I preferred tea or coffee at breakfast. Carlo, who had spent half his life in the Salvetter house keeping the old order polished and the young men alive. "Why?" I asked. He set the water down on the floor by my chair. "Because Caterina trusted the wrong son." The words landed crooked. Before I could make sense of them, another man stepped into the room. Matteo looked immaculate, which somehow made him fouler. Cream suit, silk tie, a bruise fading near his jaw like a carelessly remembered thought. He smiled as if we had been separated by weather instead of arson, murder, and abduction. "Elena," he said warmly. "You really do make everything difficult." I stared at him until my throat stopped trying to close. "You burned Florence. I burned paper. There were people inside. People were warned." Carlo made a small movement. Matteo ignored it. He crouched in front of me. "You should have married me quietly. I was prepared to be generous. With my family business, with your illusions." The generator coughed again, 15 seconds again. I forced myself to breathe through my nose. Incense, mold, salt, a top note of orange oil from cheap polish, beneath that candle wax and river mud, not sea then Harbor Chapel. Old St. Marta maybe, on the industrial side where warehouses backed the water and priests forgot to look too closely at donations. Matteo saw my gaze shift and smiled wider. "There she is." "Still working. What do you want?" The ledger obviously, Dante's access codes, his hand forced where mine cannot yet reach. He tilted his head. "And perhaps one honest answer. Did he touch you before or after the road?" I said nothing. That unsettled him more than outrage would have. There it was, the mirror of Dante, cracked differently. Same blood, same watchfulness. But where Dante used silence to prevent himself, Matteo used it to make room for cruelty. Carlo stood by the door, pale and rigid. "You think Dante is cleaner?" Matteo asked softly. "He simply hides the stain better. Our father made him a blade. I learned to smile, that's all." "Stop," Carlo said. Matteo ignored him. "Do you know why Dante was the chosen son?" "Because when our mother tried to run, he didn't run with her. He stayed." The room went cold. A lie, maybe. A cruelty shaped like truth. Worse, because I could believe part of it. Matteo rose. "Think on that while I arrange your exchange." When he left, Carlo remained. I turned to him slowly. "Is it true?" His eyes filled with the kind of shame old men carry quietly until it leaks. "He was 20, Carlo said. He believed his father when he said there was time." That was not an answer. It was worse. It was the shape of a regret no one could fix. "Then why betray him?" Carlo leaned against the wall as if the years had all arrived at once. "Because I served his mother first. She asked me once, if Dante ever became his father, stop him." His mouth shook. "And lately I could no longer tell the difference between protection and possession. I should have hated him cleanly. I didn't. That was the ugly thing about real betrayal. It came wearing reasons. I waited until he stepped close enough to check the rope at my wrists. Then I smashed my forehead into his nose. He stumbled back with a curse. I grabbed the water bottle, twisted, and spilled it deliberately across the concrete toward the generator cable fed under the door. Cheap industrial cords spark when wet enough. Not much, sometimes enough. My wrists were still bound, my head rang, but perfumers work with solvents and flame. We learn what catches. I kicked the bottle hard, water spread. The next cough of the generator came with a spit of light, a sharp pop, then darkness. Men shouted outside. I got one breath of savage satisfaction before the door slammed open again, and Mateo's voice cut through the black. Find her. On the edge of too late, I smiled into the dark because now at least they had to earn me. Darkness changes sound. In the black after the generator failed, every movement turned huge. A shoe scraping concrete, Carlos swearing through blood, men hitting walls with their shoulders because they knew the room and suddenly didn't. I rolled off the chair before anyone could grab for the silhouette I had been a second before and hit the floor hard enough to jar my teeth. My wrists were still bound. The rope cut deeper when I twisted, but Carlo had loosened it without meaning to when he checked the knot. Guilt makes people clumsy. I used my teeth. There are indignities that become survival so fast you stop naming them. I sawed through one strand, then another, and listened. Outside, Mateo was barking orders at men who had long mistaken fear for loyalty. Close by, the smell map in my head kept building itself. Incense, harbor water, oxidized brass. A candle wax blend sold only to churches. St. Marta, it had to be. The rope gave. I crawled toward the wall just as the bulb flickered back and died again. Emergency power somewhere else in the building. Not here. Good. A hand closed around my ankle. I kicked backward blindly and heard a grunt. Carlo. Elena, wait! I rolled onto my back, breathing hard. His nose was bleeding down the front of his shirt. In the thin light from the hall, he looked ancient. You don't get to tell me to wait. I can get you to the side passage. Why? Because I was wrong. The confession came out raw enough to believe. That was the terrible thing. I believed him and hated it. Outside, a shot cracked, closer this time. Dante, I whispered before I could stop myself. Carlo's face tightened. If he came for blood. Good, some furious part of me thought. Then immediately, no, not if it killed him. Carlo knelt, cut the rest of the rope from my wrists with a pocket knife, and pressed the knife into my hand. Left corridor, sacristy stairs, don't trust the front. He rose too slowly. The next shot took him in the chest. The force spun him halfway around before he hit the floor. For one frozen second, I thought sound had failed me. Then Mateo stepped into the doorway with a pistol in his hand and all the civility gone from his face. Sentimental to the end, he said. I moved before grief could, knife up, low, fast. Not because I had any fantasy of winning a fight against an armed man. Because there are moments when terror becomes shape and you use it. Mateo caught my wrist, slammed me into the wall, and the knife skidded away. Pain burst along my shoulder. He leaned close enough for me to smell his cologne under gunpowder and anger. This is what Dante does to everything, he said. He makes people choose him against reason. You're not reason, I said, his mouth twisted. No. I'm honesty. A sound answered him from somewhere deeper in the chapel. 3 quick shots, a body dropping, men shouting Dante's name not as command but warning. Mateo went still. Then the entire building seemed to inhale. Dante St. Marta's chapel had 3 entries, one blind angle in the bell corridor, and a harbor side passage. My mother once used to send food to dockworkers her husband wouldn't be seen helping. Mateo had forgotten she taught me the same map she used to run. That was his mistake. Mine was easier to name. Every man between me and Elena stopped being human the second I smelled bergamot from my own gloves on the railing where they had dragged her down. When Mateo looked back toward the corridor, I hit him. The shot went wide. Marble cracked above my shoulder. Then we were on the floor, his gun skidding, my hand at his throat, his knee driving hard into my ribs. We had been boys together once. Same tutors, same blood, same father. That was the obscenity of it. We knew exactly where to hurt each other. Elena, Dante barked without looking at me. I ran, not away, never that. Toward the sacristy stairs Carlo had named with his last clean act. A man lunged out of the dark near the font. I drove the recovered knife into his forearm because Sophia had once told me men drop things when they hurt enough, and she had been right. He screamed. I took his gun and hated how natural the weight felt. At the top of the stairs, Tommaso appeared gray-faced and one-armed, blood seeping through fresh bandages, fury keeping him upright. Of course you're armed, he said hoarsely. I'm telling Sophia none of this. Carlo's down, his expression changed, briefly enough. Boss has Matteo, he said. Can you walk? Yes. Good. Don't prove me a liar. We reached the nave together. St. Marta's was half chapel, half warehouse, candles shoved against crates, saints staring down at smugglers and sinners alike. Men were spread across the pews and stone floor in the aftermath of violence, too fast to be theatrical. Nico crouched behind the overturned donation chest with a gun he clearly resented holding. I am having an ethically confusing day, he called when he saw me, then seeing I was alive. Oh, thank God. Sophia threatened to revive me just to kill me if you died. At the altar steps, Dante and Matteo had staggered to their feet. Blood ran from Dante's mouth. Matteo held a backup blade in one hand, smiling in the shattered way people do when they finally stop pretending they can come back from themselves. You stayed, Matteo said to me, and it was not admiration. It was accusation. I understood then what made him the mirror. Dante feared becoming his father. Matteo had embraced becoming the son that father would reward. He saw the ledger packet tucked inside my coat. Of course he did. He came for me. Dante moved first, but I was closer to the iron candle stand beside the front pew. I swung it two-handed into Matteo's ribs with every frightened, furious thing I had left. Metal rang against bone. He stumbled sideways. The blade dropped. Dante hit him and drove him to the marble hard enough to crack breath out of both of them. That was my surprise. Not that I could hurt someone, that I would if it meant ending the reach of his hands. Men closed in. Tommaso kicked Matteo's knife away. Nico emerged from behind the donation chest muttering, I'm too attractive for live fire, and to his credit still covered the side aisle. Matteo laughed blood into the sanctuary. Elena, he said, turning his head enough to find me, ask him about the night our mother ran. Dante's hand tightened on his brother's collar. I looked at Dante, really looked. He did not deny it. He did not hide from it either. That was worse. We're leaving, Tommaso said sharply, but there are moments the world narrows until only one answer matters. What happened? I asked. Dante's chest rose once, fell. My mother asked me to meet her at the east gate, he said. I chose a meeting with my father first. I thought I had an hour. His voice did not shake. I was wrong. The chapel went silent. Matteo smiled like a wound. There it was, the slow mystery opening at last, not betrayal exactly, not innocence either. The kind of guilt that builds a man out of iron because flesh once failed him and he never forgave it. I crossed the aisle before anyone could stop me. When I reached Dante, I didn't touch his face. I touched the hand he had braced on the altar rail. Leather glove, bergamot, blood. He looked at me as if the floor might vanish. You were 20, I said. And she died? Yes. He closed his eyes once fast, like pain trying to pass for a blink. It didn't absolve him. That wasn't the point. The point was that he had told me the ugliest thing without making me drag it out of him. Outside, sirens far off in the harbor began to rise. Not close enough to matter yet. Close enough to hurry choice. Tommaso hauled Matteo up. Dante stood. We were all blood, incense, and consequence. Then Matteo laughed again and said the one thing that made the future narrow to a blade. She's carrying the last formula, brother. Kill me and you'll never know what mother left for your little bride. One of them might not survive what came next. The last formula was hidden in the chapel organ. Of course it was. Caterina Salvetor had been a woman with a taste for drama and codes, and Bellucci blood had always respected both. While Tommaso's men dragged Matteo into the vestry, and Nico called ahead with the clipped efficiency of a man who had complained so long he had accidentally become competent. I climbed the choir steps with Dante at my back and incense, still stinging my lungs. The organ bench lifted. Inside, wrapped in waxed linen, lay one final page. No roots, no money, a letter. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Dante stood so close I could feel the heat of him without contact. If you are reading this, she had written, then one of my sons survived long enough to learn what his father built from my fear. Below that were names, judges, port officials, priests, men Dante's father had bought with Bellucci shipments and Salvetor violence, enough to collapse what remained of the old network. Enough to bury Matteo, if he still believed control meant inheritance. At the bottom, in ink lighter with age, one final line. Dante, if you came late and came anyway, do not live like punishment is loyalty. The words left the air changed. He took the page from me carefully like a relic or a weapon, maybe both. Then the first blast hit the harbor wall, stones shook, dust rained from the pipes, men below shouted. Mateo had not come to St. Marta hoping to escape quietly. He had come with enough loyalists to level the old world and call it succession. We barely made it down the choir stairs before the second explosion tore through the side transept. After that, there was no order left except survival. Tommaso shoved me behind the baptismal font and took position at the broken doors with a rifle braced one-handed against his wounded shoulder, because apparently stubbornness could replace blood. Volumed. Nico, white around the mouth and muttering what sounded like a half-finished novena for cowards, dragged crates into cover and still found time to yell, "If anyone dies on a fasting day." I will be furious. Outside, headlights washed the rain. Men poured through the harbor yard in dark suits and tactical gear, muzzle flashes strobing against wet stone. Mateo's people. Not all of them knew what they were dying for. That did not stop the bullets. Dante moved through it with a terrible calm that no longer looked inhuman to me. It looked expensive. Every shot cost him something. Every choice did. I could see it now. A round shattered the saint above the altar. Marble fragments cut my cheek. I wiped blood away and saw on a side table the silver thurible the priest used for incense, already half full with hot charcoal from evening mass interrupted by war. Perfume is chemistry wrapped in memory. Smoke is only another kind of carrier. I tore open my bottle from the conservatory, the unfinished accord I had packed like a fool on the train platform because I had not known how to leave it behind. High-proof alcohol base, citrus oils. Resin volatile enough. "What are you doing?" Nico demanded from behind a pillar. "Improvising, those are always my last good thoughts before disaster." I dumped the perfume into the thurible. Citrus and resin bloomed hard. Tommaso caught on first, eyes widening. He fired 2 covering shots while I swung the chain and hurled the smoking burner through the broken transept toward the stacked fuel, cans just inside the service truck Mateo's men had backed to. Close to the wall. The blast was smaller than the harbor charges. It was enough. Flame ran fast over alcohol and fuel. Men dove back shouting. The east approach vanished behind smoke thick with bergamot, orange blossom, resin, and fire. My fire, my choice. Dante looked at me across the nave through all of it, and for one flashing second, the whole war narrowed to the astonishment in his face. Then Mateo used the smoke to come through the side aisle. He had lost his jacket, gained more blood, and looked almost beautiful in the way disasters sometimes do right before they take the roof with them. He fired once. Tommaso dropped behind the font with a curse. "Brother," Mateo called over the gunfire, "still protecting what you want instead of what lasts?" Dante stepped out from cover. Everything in me went cold. No, he did not look at me. That frightened me more than if he had. "This ends here," he said. Mateo smiled. "It started with you staying." They moved at the same time. I will remember pieces forever and none of them in the right order. Dante driving Mateo back toward the altar rail. Mateo's blade catching Dante below the ribs. Nico, astonishingly steady now, firing out the side window to keep the aisle clear while muttering, "Sophia will absolutely not sleep with me after this. But at least she'll respect the effort." Tommaso rising again despite everything and taking another man down at the door. Then Mateo broke free and came for me one last time. Maybe he knew hurting me would end his brother more thoroughly than any bullet. Maybe he simply wanted the one thing Dante would cross any line to stop. Whatever the reason, he reached me with murder in his face and blood on his teeth. I had no weapon left but the broken chain of the thurible, so I used it. I wrapped the hot metal around his knife wrist and yanked with all my weight. Skin burned, he shouted. The blade dropped. Dante crossed the space between us and hit him so hard they both crashed through the first pew. When they came up, Mateo had Dante's gun. Everything stopped. Rain hit the shattered, stained glass. Fire licked the east doors. Somewhere sirens grew closer. Mateo's hand shook once. "You were always his son," he said, not to me, to Dante. "That was your victory." "Not mine." Dante's face went blank in the way only grief can blank a man. "No," he said. "This was." He fired before Mateo could. The sound filled the chapel and emptied it in the same instant. Mateo fell against the altar steps, looked briefly younger, then not at all. No one moved for a breath. Cost came in fast after that. Carlo dead in the cellar. 7 of Dante's men down across Harbor Stone. Tommaso sliding to the floor at last, more blood than anyone had